From our 22 News Broadcast Center is 22 News in Focus.
Hi everyone, I'm Nick Oresco. Election 2023 is now over. While the races were local, there were some surprise results. And now we can look forward to the run up to the presidential election in November 2024. Today on 22 News in Focus, we'll take a look at the recent election and what's in store for next year. Joining me now with his insights on the local, state, and national politics is political consultant Tony Signoli. Tony, as always, we thank you for being here.
Absolutely, Nick.
All right, so let's start with the mayoral race in Springfield. There was some controversy in the days before the election with allegations of possible voter fraud by the Hearst campaign. Of course, we know now Dominic Sarno did win that race, but do you think the allegations against Hearst hurt his campaign?
Not as much as they could have. I think in that race, that all came out so late that both campaigns, their key supporters, they already knew who they were going to vote for. Those who were solidly with Hearst or Sarno stayed that course. It may have impacted some folks who might have been undecided, but I don't think enough so, not at all, especially when you take a look at the plurality of votes that was there for Sarno overall.
Voter turnout for Springfield was less than 19%. Do you think more people might turn out looking for new leadership for the city?
In the future, it's always a possibility, but you need a major issue to make something like that happen. In this particular race, Sarno was such a known quantity, having been battle tested, so to speak, through so many different issues, so many challenges, man-made and natural disasters, from tornado to gas explosions, etc. His handling of the pandemic, that type of thing. The average voter looks at that, and when you're voting for mayor, it's very different than when you're voting for a city councilor or one of a member of a board of alder people, for an example. You're looking for that person who's going to be able to sit behind the big desk with the big phone, so to speak, and handle things. And he made that pretty abundantly clear to folks, and I think that's why he carried the day.
It was a relatively close race between the two. Are you surprised that Sarno once again came out on top?
That's interesting, too, because after 16 years, I got to tell you, being a mayor of any city is really, really difficult. You're going to make your enemies. You're going to make folks who are angry about something a decade ago, and they bear that grudge and bring it to the polls with them 10 years later. But the reality, I think here, that number was pretty darn good for someone who's been in office as long as Dominic Sarno has been. In my business, when we've become now used to 51-49 victories, an almost 60-40 victory is pretty much a resounding victory for Sarno.
Yeah, Sarno getting 57% of that vote. Hearst, of course, getting the other 42. This is Mayor Sarno's sixth term now in office. Do you think people continue to vote for him? Why do you think more people continue to vote for him?
You know, it's almost what I said a little bit earlier. It's the battle-tested piece of Dominic Sarno. But the other part of it, almost as his campaign talked about, his campaign slogan was a mayor who really cares. I think people really understood that. They knew that that was true. He was a guy, is a person who does the job 24/7. He's omnipresent. And it wasn't just that he did the job in that manner. He even campaigned that way. That's something that surprised a lot of political observers, that he didn't do a Rose Garden campaign here at all. He went out, he was out there, and often it seemed like he was out there even more than all of his primary opponents combined. There was that energy. There's an adage in my business, they've got to like you to vote for you, and for them to like you, they've got to know that you love them. And I think he made that clear over and over again, his love for the city, his love for the people of Springfield.
Moving north to Franklin County now, there was a huge upset in Greenfield. Greenfield Mayor Roxanne Wiedengartner ran for a second four-year term and was ousted by challenger City Councilor Virginia DeSorger by a pretty big number, 73% to Wiedengartner's 26%. What happened there?
The exact opposite of Sarno and Hearst. You know, the mayor, the incumbent, did a very poor job of communicating things, especially over the last year or so. There were some big issues in that town. There was a police officer on the force, a black gentleman who was discriminated against. The courts ruled in his favor. That started an issue. Her city council then somewhat defunded the police department. They did not agree with the police budget that she put forward. I think it was almost $500,000 that they cut her budget. And what was shocking was not there long after that she and the police chief got together, held a media conference and said, okay, that's what you're going to do? Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut the midnight shift. There's going to be no police officers in Greenfield. It was shocking to people, even outside of Greenfield, to business people and others throughout the region, to see the Massachusetts State Police take up residents, God bless them, for the midnight shift to keep things safe. You just don't do that with public safety. That was one big issue, and there were a few other issues as well too, schools, etc., other funding, but the biggest piece, the lack of communication. When you're mayor, you are commander-in-chief, even though your police chief is running the show. When you look at Springfield in that regard, yes, the police superintendent very much in charge, but clearly the mayor always there on the front line and never ever would have made a move like that to cut police coverage.
And hence a big change in Greenfield.
Yeah.
Agawam's new mayor, Christopher Johnson, was also the first mayor of Agawam. Why did he choose to run, and were you surprised at that win?
Well, you know, one of the things that I had heard him say as to why he chose to run now is the same reason he chose to leave the office. His children were young when he left. Now his children are not at home, and that he could concentrate and focus more time. Two good people, Cecilia Calabrese and Chris Johnson, both well known to the community. But the unique thing about Johnson is that folks remembered him as the first mayor of Agawam, and he did some amazing things. After the people of Agawam had voted to make that change, to go to a mayoral form of government, this is the person that they chose to lead them then. And he could look to that, point to that. Plus, it didn't hurt that even after he left the mayoralty and that day-to-day grind, he returned to the city council, and he was extremely active and at the forefront of so many issues.
Let's move to Berkshire County now. Pittsfield has a new mayor after two-term incumbent Mayor Linda Tyre decided not to run for re-election this year. Voters chose City Councilor Peter Marchetti to fill that executive office. Who is Marchetti, and what does he bring to the city of Pittsfield now? Well,
I tell you, that's a great question in the realm of, if you asked that question in Pittsfield, who he is, people would know, because for 8 years he was their city council president. Off the top of my head, I want to say it was 16 years that he was on the city council itself. A vice president of Berkshire Bank, local, a fellow who was there helping retail folks with their loans, etc. He knew people, and also very involved in so many different community functions. I think that was the big piece. A native Pittsfield son, very, very well known. Folks knew of the commitment that he had made for decades to his home community. And I think that's very much what helped him to carry the day in Pittsfield.
And the theme here looks like the more you are out and about, the more likely of you winning that race.
Yeah.
Well, some of our representatives in Washington will be on the campaign trail in 2024. We'll have that discussion when we come back. You're watching 22 News in Focus. And welcome back to 22 News in Focus. We've been discussing the recent election results with political consultant Tony Signoli. Let's turn now to 2024. Some members of Congress from Massachusetts will be up for re-election this year. And let's start with Senator Elizabeth Warren. What are some of the issues that may be on her platform?
Well, you know, Elizabeth Warren is not only a senator from Massachusetts, she's more of a national, sometimes international senator, the bigger issues, so to speak. But clearly for her, it's a lot of the same issues as when she first got elected, Nick. It's economics, it's economy, it's going after Wall Street, bank regulation, etc. But certainly right now, one of the things that I think we'll hear her talk about for re-election is the reality of the economic impact on average regular folks. The economy might be doing great statistically and factually, and you can make all these arguments, but a lot of people aren't feeling that. And I think that's something she'll have to speak to in re-election back here at home.
Do you have any information right now on how she's polling in our state?
Interesting. There had been some polls that showed that Charlie Baker, if he were to return to the Commonwealth, would have a good opportunity against her. The polls are only as good as when they're done. You know, it's a snapshot of that moment. She is a political machine. When she gets moving, she can raise millions and millions of dollars, and she's hard to keep up with. There's a lot of energy there, and she's got a gigantic support base. So I think that the polls may indicate right now that somebody like a Baker could do this. He's certainly not coming back to Massachusetts to run for the United States Senate, not when he's got the gig that he's got.
So taking him out of contention, former Governor Charlie Baker, who are some of her opponents?
That's interesting. Right now, there's no named player out there. There's not even whispers. There's a thought that what could happen is that in the primary, she might get someone from the alt-left. You know, we call it being primaried. You know, someone from your own party. Is there someone out there that wants to push her, move her on a particular issue? And that would be more of a nuisance campaign. But when you look at the numbers for her overall, and you take a look at any other name out there other than Charlie Baker, there's really no one, Democrat or Republican or independent, that would really have an opportunity against her, given the status that she's currently got.
So that gives her some pretty good chances.
I think so, without a doubt, yeah.
Well, Representative Richard Neal has been in the Congressional House for Representatives for a while now as well. Well known here in Western Massachusetts. He's been the chair of the powerful House Committee on Ways and Means. In recent years, he's faced some competition for representative. What will his platform be this time?
You know, I would never speak for him, but what we're already seeing right now from him is he's telegraphing what's important to him. And it's all the real issues that folks in his very diverse district are impacted by. He literally eats, drinks, and sleeps Western Mass, as we know. You see him all the time. But to the exact question that you're asking, he's already talking about retirement issues that people are facing. He's shrewd enough and astute enough to know that baby boomers and seniors having difficulty. He's also talking about affordable housing. Certainly we've heard him on infrastructure and travel, the need for high-speed rail, etc. He's out there. And I think that's what you're going to continue to see from Congressman Neal. Given the weight that he's got on the Democratic side of the aisle, and amazingly, especially at this contentious time in Washington, there are Republicans in the Congress, maybe not the MAGA crowd, but there are others who like him and who respect him, that will go to him for his opinion on things. He can get things done and bring things back. That's what you'll see the most from him, constituent service and doing things that the district needs.
So who are some of his opponents?
You know, right now, again, no one announced. You hear names for down the road. You hear folks who would perhaps want to run or take a look at this when his time comes, when he exits, when he decides. And I think that's going to be the case, especially after the race that he had against Alex Morris, where he defeated Morris significantly. Even in Holyoke, he beat Morris, you know, where Morris was the mayor of Holyoke. So I think that when you hear any noise about Neal, it's more about down the road. I don't think there's a lot of people that want to take on that political prowess, that political war chest, or someone who's as well versed in what goes on in Washington and can bring back what we still need here in Western Mass.
Another big name in Western Massachusetts, of course, is Congressman Jim McGovern. Yeah. He's popular with his constituency, but he's also faced some competition in recent elections as well. What do you expect on his platform this year? Interesting.
McGovern, we're already hearing very, very strongly that he's really in sync with a lot of his district, whether it's the more conservative Worcester County neck of the woods or the rest of the district, the Northampton area, et cetera, or up on almost to the Vermont and New Hampshire border. Food insecurity is a really big issue. And he's talking about that. He's addressing that with legislation. You're hearing him also try to address the real issues that folks in his district are dealing with. People that are working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. The economy, again, statistically may be great and good, but that's not what people in his district are seeing. And he really seems to speak to that. The other thing with Jim McGovern, very much like with Richard Neal, they come home on the weekend. They come home when they're not in session. I get a chance to do this all over the country, and it's amazing to me how many members of Congress, the House especially, don't do what Neal and McGovern do. They stay in D.C. or they stay at their extra residence in Virginia, etc. These guys, they're on the ground. They've got the pulse of their districts.
You talk about food insecurity with Jim McGovern. I mean, he's a huge part of the food bank of Western Massachusetts, to Monty's March when he used to do it. I mean, he was out in that community, always fighting for food security.
Well said. You know, you could say he puts his money where his mouth is, but he actually puts the rubber on the bottom of his sole of the shoe where it needs to be. He's out there marching, doing things, and people see that. You go by his Northampton office sometimes, you'll see him sitting there on a Saturday talking to constituents. That's how it's done.
What are the chances of a Republican or independent candidate beating either Neal or McGovern?
Really difficult. Though, you know, when you say independent, there are more non-registered, unregistered folks in Massachusetts. That is the largest denomination for a party. It's more so than there are Democrats, and certainly more so than there are Republicans. It's almost impossible right now for a Republican to come forth and beat either one of these gentlemen in these districts. The Republican State Committee is on its knees, suffering from lawsuits and other issues, and a ton of bad media over the last couple of years. And there's just no name out there. There's no player. As far as an independent or an unenrolled, that's difficult too, because that's someone trying to come forward without party apparatus of either side. And again, both are so well placed, so well known, and they've got war chests on top of it, that it's difficult to see someone challenging either one of them.
We talked about a local election, but of course a presidential election is also up for 2024 next year. We'll learn more about that after the break. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. We're back now continuing our conversation with political consultant Tony Signoli. The U.S. presidential campaign has already begun with a line of Republicans looking to run against current President Joe Biden. According to a recent poll, former President Donald Trump leads among voting Republicans despite his current legal problems. Trump has not participated in any Republican candidate debates. The first presidential caucus is set for January 15th in Iowa. Massachusetts will have both a Republican and Democratic primary on March 5th. Back here now with Tony. Let's get into the basics here. What is the difference between a caucus and a primary?
The shortest answer that I can give you. A primary, average regular folks get to go out and vote in the primary for the candidate of their choice. That percentage, those numbers, are then turned into a delegate count. Every state gets X amount of delegates. Caucus, that's some crazy stuff, and I've experienced it in different states. Everyone knows about the Iowa caucus. Everybody who's designated to be a delegate by their community, by their party, shows up in a big room, Nick, and they give speeches, and they advocate for their candidate. And as a candidate falls by the wayside, those folks then can go over to other parts of the room and join other campaigns. It is the most unscientific thing you have ever seen, and it can get pretty raucous. And in the last few years, that's quite often, very much so. And quite often you're hoping that the police are in the room. Yeah.
Does Trump not participating in any of these debates, there have been several now, at least a few, does that hurt his chance in this race?
How amazing. There was a time where if you didn't show up to the debate, that was it. You were done. You were afraid. You were out of the race. But Donald Trump has never campaigned in the way that anybody else has. He's doing his own thing, and it hasn't hurt him at all, as we're seeing in polling, as we're seeing in numbers. His closest competitor looks to be Nikki Haley right now, and she's almost double digits behind him. So no, it has not hurt him.
I believe this will be the fourth Republican debate. Do you think Trump is going to show up in Iowa?
My gut, probably not. It doesn't make a lot of sense unless he knows that by showing up, he's the star. He dominates the stage. I think that his advisors, if he has any advisors other than he himself, even when he's surrounded by a group of folks, he's still going to call his own shots. It's a 50-50, but I don't think that he shows. It's the formula so far that's worked for him. Just don't even deal with it. Do your own event somewhere else and get just as much media without anybody taking any shots at you.
So going off of that, who are the strongest Republican candidates that could win the nomination at the Republican convention over him?
Right now, Nikki Haley, for a whole bunch of reasons. Her last debate performance, she was quick on her feet. She was able to fight back against attacks made in her direction. The other thing, too, is that Tim Scott from her own home state, South Carolina, a guy who owes his Senate seat to her. As governor, she appointed him to the Senate. And he has dropped out of the race. What we've already seen is 3 or 4 points have moved in her directions. It would seem that she is the most affable, most able right now. But who knows what goes on as the others start to attack her. You know how this game works.
President Biden did mention and did announce that he is running for another term. Do you expect any other Democrats to come forward and challenge him?
Well, it's interesting. Most people don't know it, but there is a challenger in New Hampshire, and that's a member of the House, Dean Phillips, Minnesota, and he's there in New Hampshire right now on the ballot, where the president is not. Recall that the president thought that the first contest should be South Carolina, more indicative of the diversity of the country, and not New Hampshire. So New Hampshire's angry. Joe Biden made it clear where he stood on this, and he will not be on the ballot. So Dean Phillips is. So that would be the Democrat right now. Challenging him,
Well, what do you think Phillips has to do to get the nomination?
Impossible, frankly. I'll cut to it. It's not like another guy in 1968 from Minnesota, Hubert Humphrey, who was vice president, who was able to run after Lyndon Johnson got out of the race. It's just not there. This is a strange thing that this fellow is doing, but I just can't see it going much beyond into other primaries or caucuses.
Now, Jill Stein is the Green Party candidate, and Robert Kennedy Jr. is running as an independent as well. What would this mean for the Democrats?
It is dangerous and it is deadly, because every point that you take away from Joe Biden's column helps Donald Trump, and everyone knows that. Republican or Democratic strategists, that's one of the things that we think the Republicans are really kind of sitting back and laughing at, because especially RFK Jr. in this race. It is amazing what we're seeing in polling. He's getting some significant numbers. He's taking folks from both Biden and Trump, but he hurts Biden more in the long run because Biden needs those votes. And you've got RFK out there with a decently funded campaign, which is also interesting to a lot of us right now. He's a player. Jill Stein, she's been a spoiler in the past, and here she goes again. And a last thought, not to get too personal on it, some of these campaigns are just nuisance campaigns. Jill Stein, Dean Phillips, they know they're not going to win the presidency. The fact that they're in there causing a Biden or others to have to spend money, it's a shame.
Who are the no labels and what impact could they have in the presidential campaign?
Interesting. Most people have no idea who the no label party is, but they are out there right now and in the media the last week especially because United States Senator Joe Manchin has decided not to run for re-election to the Senate. He would have lost for re-election in West Virginia, so he's flirting with the idea, at I believe 77 years old himself, of running for president. I don't think there's a groundswell out there for Joe Manchin, but the no-label tech team, who are they? This was Joe Lieberman, the former United States Senator from Connecticut. It is former Governor Hogan from Maryland. These are folks that think that it's time for parties to be put aside and to find some middle-of-the-road consensus. The big thing about the no-label group, where does their money come from? That's a great question right now because they file as a PAC or super PAC, and we're not aware of how are they being funded. Are they a major player in this? I don't know. I think RFK right now is the bigger factor.
Of course, between Biden and Trump as well, age is a huge factor.
Yep.
Trump being 78, Biden 82, so something to look out for with that as well. I'll have some final words after the short break. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You've been watching 22 News in Focus. We've been taking a look at last week's election results and looking forward to the presidential election in 2024. Thank you to our political guest, political consultant Tony Signoli. Tony, as we head into 2024, any last words?
I think the biggest thing right now is we're about to see a presidential election, one way or the other, that's going to affect generations and generations to come. So hopefully, Nick, people will take this seriously and vote.
All right, Tony, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Always appreciate it. And if you missed any part of this program, you can find it on our website at wwlp.com. From all of us here at 22 News, enjoy your Sunday.